Okay, so now that we've talked about the shape of the demand curve, we've talked about a demand curve which is downward sloping like this. We talked about the demand curve. We took the demand curve from the demand schedule, and what we said about the law of demand was that as the price increases, the quantity demanded will go down. All right? And as the price decreases, the quantity demanded will go up. So we're going to have a downward sloping demand curve. We drew this in order to illustrate just that relationship between the price and the quantity. But then at the end of the video, I said to you, okay, but what is it that means that this demand curve is here as opposed to over here or over here? What could change besides price that might make this demand curve shift? In other words, so if price moves by itself, so let's say we have a price here, we follow it to our demand curve, and we see that that leads to a quantity of Q1. If our price goes up, if nothing else happens except our price going up, we just go to our curve, and we see Q2. So we see a change in the quantity demanded, a movement along the curve, which results in the second quantity being lower than the first because the price has gone up. So we've demonstrated this inverse relationship. But what else can happen that might be able to make this change? In other words, are there factors that could change our willingness to pay, our willingness and ability to pay, because that's really what demand is. We're demonstrating our ability and willingness to pay at various price levels. What if that whole thing shifted? What sorts of things would make that change? Well, think about it. One thing that could change is our income. Or if this is a market, the incomes of all people. Maybe that would change the quantity demanded at all prices. So if earlier, if I had that $10 in my pocket and the price of a slice of pizza is $5, I am able to pay for two. But what if I suddenly had $15? Well, then all of a sudden, nothing's changed about the price. It's still $5, but I'm able to obtain three. So if our income increases in most cases of goods, what's going to happen? At all prices, as our income goes up at all prices, the quantity demanded is going to change. So at price 2, the quantity changes. At price 1, the quantity changes just because we have more flexibility. We have more ability to pay. And so our, that should really go here, but our demand curve is going to shift outward. Our demand is going up. Now, this thing about income changing has some interesting effects. That's where we have to separate types of goods. So for a normal good, in most cases, where there is a normal good, there is something that economists would call a normal good. As income rises, quantity demanded is going to rise. Demand goes up, right? For a normal good. So ordinary things. So if I really like bacon, and I can have it once a week at my current income. If my income were to double, maybe I could eat bacon twice a week. So because it's a normal good, I consider that as I get more income, I'm going to demand more of it. But there is another class of good which is called an inferior good. Right? An inferior good. Think about Well, maybe. I mean, not everyone's life is the same, but when I was a student, sometimes I had to go out and I had to buy the cheapest food available. So I might have bought those, those little packets of noodles that come with a seasoning package, and they're maybe 37 cents at the dollar store. You can get 3 for $1 or whatever. Those are, they're not tremendously nourishing, but they'll do if I have a low income. But if my income was suddenly to rise, if I go from being a student to being a corporate executive with a salary now, I am likely to demand less of that inferior good, those ramen noodles. So in the case of an inferior good, if income goes up, then the quantity is going to go down, so demand goes down. So in the case of an inferior good, if our incomes rise, so if we get a word problem that says, okay, all of a sudden the incomes of everybody has risen, and this is an inferior good, this is going to move the other direction. So there you have it. So for an inferior good, that would move inwards as incomes went up, because at all prices, that it would go down, and so therefore we would have movement this way. Call this D1, right? What are some other things that could happen? Well, another one is price of related goods. And this goes into the thing we were talking about earlier, which was the substitution effect. So we have the ability as consumers to decide, okay, well, if this is coffee and the price has gone up, we can demand less. We can move along our demand curve, but to compensate for that, we might buy more tea, which means that the tea market, the demand curve would go up. So when we talk about related goods, we could be talking about substitutes, right? So if A is a substitute for B, okay, if A is a substitute for B, whatever this happens to be, A is a substitute for B, and so if the price of A goes up, right? Price of A goes up, well, we're going to see movement along the demand curve where there's going to be less quantity demanded. Okay, so it's going to move this way. But what's going to happen to good B, right? Well, all these people are going to go over and they're going to buy this thing at B, but that hasn't affected the price of B yet. All that's happened is that the price of A has gone up. All these people can't afford it, or they don't want it anymore, so they're going to go over and they're going to buy B. So demand for B will increase. So because the price of coffee has gone up, the demand curve for tea will move over, will actually expand. And there are other goods that are called complements, right? So complements are like something that goes hand in hand with something. So, for me in Canada, maybe if I have pancakes, I want to eat syrup with it, maple syrup. There's lots of beautiful maple syrup around this region. Make sure you get it if you have the chance. But in any case, maple syrup goes very nicely with pancakes. Okay, so we would say that maple syrup is a complement to pancakes. In other words, it's something that goes along with it, that people couple together in their mind. So let's picture what would happen if the price of pancakes goes up. Well then, if the price of pancakes goes up, you're going to see this effect here, where there are less pancakes demanded. Well, if we have less pancakes, then we need less syrup. So then the demand for maple syrup is actually going to move down this way, is actually going to move down. So if A is a complement to B, then if the price of A goes up, right, the price of pancakes goes up, then demand for B will decrease, right? So if the price of pancakes goes up, then we're going to demand less syrup, and that causes a shift in the syrup demand curve. It causes a change in the quantity demanded of pancakes, but that translates into a reduction in the demand for maple syrup. And we have three more non-price reasons, things that will move this curve one way or the other. Another one is preferences. Right? If all of a sudden consumers decide that they like something, well, then it doesn't matter what the price is, they're going to demand more. So therefore, this will change. Remember, when we're talking about a change in demand, we're talking about a movement of the curve, which means that at all prices, the quantity demanded is going to increase. So consumer preferences, there's a whole industry called the advertising industry, which is centered around trying to make this demand curve move outward, trying to convince you that such and such a brand of toilet paper is going to make you feel better in some way. So therefore, they're trying to affect your preferences and get this demand curve to shift out. Okay, so we have income, we have price of related goods, we have preferences, and then we also have just sheer demographics. Demographics. Right? That could be the number of people in the population, whatever this is. Let's say it's staples, it's some sort of food. Well, if we suddenly have more people, then this is going to change the demand. It's going to move the curve because at all prices, the quantity demanded is going to be higher, right? Let's say the population ages. Well, if this is the demand for walkers or pharmaceutical products or blood pressure medication, something like that, then the demand is going to move out as the population becomes older. So any of those demographics or characteristics of a population will sometimes affect the demand. And that is, again, a non-price reason for things changing. So that would have the effect of moving the curve. And then the last one is expectations. Specifically price expectations, price shortage expectations, whatever that happens to be. So, in economics, very often, expectations are more important than anything else. So, if I believe that the price of something is suddenly going to go up in a week or two, I might stock up on that. So my short term, and this is where we're talking about the short term versus the long term, but in the short term, I might run out and buy a bunch of it, whatever your brand of toilet paper. If I suddenly believe, and my expectation is that the price is going to double in a week, then I will go out today and I will buy more at whatever price it's offered at today. So that, again, is going to shift the demand curve to the right. So we need to look at these, and these are what are called, we call them the determinants of demand. Determinants of demand. That's the answer to the question I was asking. Why is the curve here as opposed to here or here? What determines where that is going to be placed in relation to these axes? What is going to be the basic relationship between price and quantity? Where is the curve going to sit? And these are the 5 basic determinants of demand that are going to take us there.